I'm Judy Gelman Myers with New Jewish Cinema for Jewish Broadcasting Service. And I'm here with Aaron Davidman, the writer and actor of a phenomenal film called Wrestling Jerusalem.
Rabbi walks into a bar. Rabbi, tell me, where have you been this morning?
Where I go every morning to pray at the Western Wall.
Every day for 40 years, I pray that there should be peace between the Jews and the Arabs. After 40 years of these prayers, how do you feel? I feel like I'm talking to a wall. 8-meter-high concrete walls run north and south. The Israelis call it the security fence. The Palestinians call it the apartheid wall. We are all the same under God. And why do we keep killing each other? You have deep questions. My heart beats faster. I read the paper, my heart beats faster. I watch the news. We're all connected. Stop the killing. Stop the killing. I can't piece anything together here. The pieces don't fit. Maybe the fragments are all we have.
Aaron, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me, Judy.
Can you talk a little bit about the play and the film and how it went from being one to the other?
Sure. So the play premiered in San Francisco at Intersection for the Arts in 2014. It's a solo performance in which I play 17 different characters that explore the multidimensionality of the Israel-Palestine conflict. Israelis, Palestinians, the characters, men, women, older, younger, soldier, citizen, a doctor, et cetera, et cetera. And the characters all weigh in on their perspectives as the character of Aaron, me, is on a journey there to Israel and to Palestine to try to understand sort of what's at the heart of this conflict. That's the format. The film is the same. It's the same text, but it's shot in 3 different locations: in the desert, in a dressing room backstage, and in front of a live audience. It cuts freely between those 3 locations. The idea being to open some of the themes up cinematically, both sort of wide in scope for the big screen, like the scene shot in the desert, and also the intimacy, like the scene shot in the dressing room, to kind of capture the internal experience and sort of the feelings behind the eyes that you can't really catch on stage.
Yeah, no, the transformation from play to film is absolutely brilliant. Let's talk about your performance. You have training as a Shakespearean actor, and we were talking on the way over about language as flow and rhythm, and I wanted to know how you translated that into the film.
Well, as I said to you, I hadn't really thought about the direct connection between performing Shakespeare and this piece, but I think it's kind of interesting because the text, Shakespeare's text, is pretty dense in its content, and it's very intentional in its rhythms and poetry, of course. And I would say that's similar to the piece that I wrote here. That's super dense in terms of content and history.
Yes.
And specific imagery, and I've also paid good attention to rhythm. I mean, the whole opening 2 minutes of the piece is really a poem. I mean, it's a list poem. It's a litany of where you might think this conflict started. You might say it all started in 1948, which you might call al-Nakba, the catastrophe. Right. You might think it all started in 1948, which you might call Milchemet ha'atzmaut, the War of Independence, and so on. It goes on from there. And so you could sort of, I wouldn't be able to, I'm not enough of a Shakespeare scholar to know if there's a list poem in any of Shakespeare, but certainly the rhythms of the language were really important to me. And then we also talked about the size of character. that performing Shakespeare. I learned early on as a young actor that sort of size and scope of those theatrical characters is really important. Also in terms of the language, how you hold the language in your mouth, and how the characters really bite off those words, and how you need to find the right rhythms, and also just the right, use your vowels, hit your consonants to make the text understood, right? I mean, that's how it's written. And it's not enough to just say it. You have to say it with stressing the right words at the right times in order for us to hear and understand what the intention is, what the line is. And so you brought up Shakespeare, and I would now look at it and say, well, we could look at some of the characters and some of the text in Wrestling Jerusalem as, there's some similar, I guess, reflections there on performance technique, possibly, or maybe even some writing.
Yeah. One of the 17 characters is Aaron Davidman. Talk about that character, but also talk about the play from the perspective of that character. Who is Aaron Davidman that he wrote this play?
Right. I mean, Aaron, in the third person, is the American Jewish man, young man, trying to, who goes to Israel for the first time when he's 25, falls in love with Israel, goes really seeking spiritual continuity, spiritual identity, cultural yearning, trying to find a place in the Jewish story. Where am I in this story? And seeing Israel as the Jewish homeland and a place in which to measure oneself against that story, or fit in. And that narrative of that trip fits sort of squarely in the middle of the piece, and it's referenced, and that sort of set the wheels in motion for my own long journey in relationship to Israel, and now Israel and Palestine. And so it's that question as a contemporary, in this contemporary moment, it's that question of how do I, as an American Jew today, grapple with the complexities of what Israel's place in the world is, and what my relationship to Israel is. And so, in a sense, I invite you, the audience, to come with me on this journey, and we go there, and I meet these different characters, and then I become them in front of you, and you, in a sense, become Aaron, listening to these characters talk to Aaron. And it's that act of listening then that becomes the real exercise of the project.
Your depictions, your characterizations of the 17 characters are just remarkable. I mean, every time a new one came on screen, I knew exactly who it was. I'd met every single one of those people. But my question now is, who did you write the play for? You've had some unusual audiences that you did not expect. So who did you write the play for, and talk about the very broad range of people who have seen it?
Sure. The play was a commission originally from Ari Roth, who was then the artistic director of Theater J in Washington, D.C. He's now the artistic director of a new company that he founded called Mosaic Theater, also in D.C. And Ari and I, as colleagues in Jewish theater, actually, I was running a Jewish theater in San Francisco at the time. Theater J is a Jewish theater. We were really, really interested in and concerned with the public conversation around Israel. What mainstream Jewish community says we can and can't say about the state of Israel. Okay, and as theater artists, it's our job to push that, the edges of what's normative or not, or what's sanctioned or not, and so, there was at that moment, a real desire to try to explore that deeply, and this piece emerged out of it. And so, the primary initial, I think of the audiences kind of in concentric circles, right? The center of that concentric circle is the American Jewish community, who all of us grapple with Israel, whether you're left, right, or center.
Every day.
And I wrote the piece to with a range of perspectives from people all over the spectrum, so that the characters would both give everyone something that they could really connect to and identify with, that their stories being represented, and also an edge to push, to challenge, your sense of what you think is right, or where you think we should be headed. And I think, by and large, we've been reaching that audience, and the audience response, again, across a pretty broad political spectrum, are responding really well to the piece. After that, I would say, pretty quickly we get concentric circles of other communities that are really interested in the piece. Of course, the Arab community, the Muslim community, the Christian community, the activist community, and those that have been fascinated or interested in this region, or this particular narrative for a long time, or those who are coming to it for the first time and say, I see it in the news, but I don't really know that much about it, and they come away with a lot of sort of new insights about what's going on over there.
Sure. You also spoke at a Google training session and an integral theory training conference. Can you talk about those?
Sure. Well, the integral theory looks at the integration of all different schools of philosophy and different kinds of life practices, and so it's a very holistic, integrated approach to our contemporary world. And they're the kind of layered approach of the piece, and all the multiple perspectives was kind of right in alignment with their whole philosophical approach. And the same is really what's happening with Google, where they do an executive training on leadership and complexity. And so they screen the film, or I do the live performance, and we have a conversation as part of a 3-day training for their executives. And there too, the conversation really isn't as specifically about Israel-Palestine as it is about the more universal themes in the piece, holding multiple perspectives, and how do we approach problem solving while taking into account all these different points of view at the same time. It's a very useful exercise to try to hold in ourselves.
Very difficult, also.
Yeah.
Can you describe some of the characters that you play?
Sure. Let's see. Early on we meet a young Palestinian Muslim guy as I'm trying to make my way to the West Bank, who tries to convert me to Islam. We have a very sweet chat, and he's a very winning character, Tariq. I meet a woman when I get there in Ramallah, who I call Farah, who's works for the UN, and she's very articulate and tries to share the perspective of what it's like to sort of live within the limitations of movement that Palestinians have to live under, living in the West Bank. We meet an American Jewish patron of Israel, who's very articulate about the need for self-preservation and sort of kind of a real protective stance over the state, and why that's so important. We meet an Israeli settler, who makes the case for Judea and Samaria, and why they should be part of Greater Israel, and so on. There are more. There's a rabbi figure who's a pretty makes a pretty strong case for a very kind of universalist perspective on the conflict and on Jewish identity.
He quotes Heschel.
Right. And he talks about the Shema. And there's a somatic psychologist, Israeli somatic psychologist, who talks about trauma, the effects of trauma, and she's probably the most objective voice because she's really talking about the science of how trauma is passed on from generation to generation through the eyes of the mother. And then there's this kind of Israeli this young Israeli guy who's smoking weed in the Dead Sea, and he's kind of groovy and has a kind of fun interaction with Aaron, and then of course there's a real kind of heart-wrenching part of the end of that
Yes.
that I don't want to give away. That's gives him some depth and his own
tremendous
experience.
gravitas.
Yeah.
Were the characters based on real people?
Yeah, they're based on interviews and some recorded and then transcribed. Some of the characters are composites of characters. A few of them are invented based on people that I know or studied. And but it's a very written piece now. I mean, I changed all the names, and it's a pretty tightly written piece.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And did you do any research in books or?
Oh gosh, I mean, enormous amount. I mean, this is one of three plays that I've written, and the film is really based on the play. But and so for years I was reading tons of history and articles and watching films and I mean talking with people. I mean the research it's exhaustive. I mean you can't do enough research on this region.
Right. This is just a sort of technical acting question.
Sure.
How did you do those accents? I mean, you talked a little bit about managing vowels and consonants, but
yeah, I mean, I have an ear for dialects, but I also
Wow.
I had audio recorded some of these folks, and then as I was developing the piece, I did a lot of public readings over the years, and so I've lived with these characters for a while, and I think that helped.
And where have you shown it, and what have the reactions been?
Well, the film premiered at the San Francisco Jewish Film Festival at the Castro Theater about a year ago, last August, 2016. And I mean, the response was pretty great. I mean, that was San Francisco is my hometown, so we were on hometown turf, and a lot of people had seen the play. It was a very exciting opening, and the San Francisco Jewish Film Festival, of course, is an amazing cultural, treasure of our country and of certainly Jewish culture. And then we've played a bunch of other festivals around the country, and now we're embarking on what we're calling the Empathy Tour. And we've screened the film in Toronto, Los Angeles. We just premiered in New York.
Got a great review in the Times.
We got a
Mazel tov.
Thank you. And we're looking at Europe. We're looking at getting to the Middle East. We need to deal with having it translated in subtitles and all that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. And then we're working on this part of the Empathy Tour is also campus and community tour. And so we've got a discussion guide that's been created for us, and we're trying to get the film screened on campuses so campus students can have conversations. We try to curate a conversation, a community conversation after the screenings. And so, because sort of like I said at the beginning, what is the public conversation over this topic? It's very challenging. It's challenging for people to have a conversation over their dinner table over this topic. And so we see the film as a real tool to try to break down some of those barriers that people have with each other, in intimacy of their own families, or also more largely within the community. And so we've done community screenings at synagogues or community centers with conversations afterwards. And and by and large, it's pretty effective. I mean, the film, people can judge for themselves, but the film seems to do a good job at softening some of the armor that we're encased in as we try to reach each other over this thorny issue.
Well, you're humanizing the characters as you present them.
Yeah.
Do you think that your identity as an American Jew gave you the freedom to do this piece that an Israeli wouldn't have had or a Palestinian wouldn't have had?
I mean, I think that being an outsider gives me a certain objectivity that being in the middle of it just can't. I'd have to leave it to Israelis and Palestinians to really answer that question, whether I did a good job of that or not. But you know, some feel that I have, and they've told me so. But in a way, I suppose you could say that doesn't really matter. I mean, that they weren't really my prime audience. You know, my prime audience actually was trying to move the conversation in America, and it seems like we've been doing that. And I think if I was, it would be a different. If I was Israeli or if I was Palestinian, it would just be a wholly different piece, completely.
Do you think that given the current political climate here in the U.S. but also in Israel, understanding the other one is even possible? And two, is it a legitimate and sufficient tool for social change? I mean,
Well, I would say it's necessary. Not only is it possible, but it's necessary at this moment and in any moment. And of course it's possible because no matter what the political climate is, you know, if you and I sit down and we try to understand each other, the political climate has no bearing on us whatsoever. There's you and me in a room. And what's it going to be?
well, it depends on who I am and who you are.
Right, but if we work at it, if we try to really listen to each other, try to really hear where each other's coming from, it's possible. I believe that. I do. And I've seen some pretty interesting conversations take place, right, you know, after this film, where people are surprised at themselves. And so, now you say, is it sufficient? You know, no. It's not sufficient because it can't possibly create harmony, you know, like that. So it takes work. You know, it's a piece of the greater project of trying to find common ground. You know, meet each other and inspire empathy, inspire understanding. You know, that's what it's about, and that takes work. It's not. There's no magic wand for that.
Okay, since I'm a great skeptic of understanding the other.
Yeah.
Can
You're sitting here trying to understand me right now. You're doing a great job.
Thank you, but you're not very other.
Okay. Fair enough. Fair enough.
Can you give me examples of conversations that have changed after
Well, I'll
seeing
just
your
tell you
film?
that, well, never mind after seeing the film, making the film, I mean, you know, when I'm invited into a Palestinian's home in the West Bank, and we, you know, their politics are pretty different from mine. We sit down and have coffee, and their kids are playing in the other room. Something's different. There's a different possibility. We break bread, you know. There's something different. We meet each other. We understand something. When you create a multi-dimensional person out of that one-dimensional other, and you know, anything's possible, and something real can really happen. And I think that's, you know, if we're just going to be satisfied with contempt, you know, I'll never talk to that. I'm not going to talk to that person. That person voted for so and so, or that's, you know, then it's over. Then there's no possibility. And contempt is a real problem in our culture right now. And I think we have to be brave and have those hard conversations. Sit down with our family who are different from us or who voted different from us and try to understand why. Where did you come from? Where were you coming from on that? You know, I mean, curiosity, I think, is a really useful tool in this moment. Stay curious. Don't know so much. You know, that's the invitation of this movie.
In all of your research and in all of the meeting people and traveling back and forth between the West Bank and Israel, were you ever in a situation where that wasn't possible?
Probably. Yeah, probably. Yeah. Sure. There were moments where people were just railing against the other side, and I just had to kind of sit through it.
And did you use that material? Did you not use that material?
Well, I mean, there's a conversation between Aaron and this character Daniel, this medical student who crosses a line for him, and it's an argument. It's not a listening exercise anymore, and I think that that happens. We've all got our lines, and he crossed mine, and the higher self listener was out, and my more fear-based self was in, and it was an argument, not a conversation anymore.
It's a great moment in the film. Talk about your U.S. grassroots distribution strategy.
So, well, I mentioned the empathy tour.
Right.
We have information on our website that anyone can reach out to us and screen the movie in their community if they want. And if I'm available, I could even be available to come. And the screenings can happen in movie theaters. We're working with an organization called TUG, and they'll set it up. It can happen in a community center. It can happen on college campuses. Any place where there's or at synagogues, churches, mosques. I mean, anywhere there's a space to gather. We want people to use this film as a tool to shift this conversation, like we've been talking about.
Fantastic. I'm Judy Gelman Myers, and I've been with Aaron Davidman, writer and actor of the remarkable film Wrestling Jerusalem. Aaron, thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me, Judy.
And thank you. Bye.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support JBS, the Jewish Broadcasting Service, with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double chai or more, to the nonprofit organization Jewish Education in Media. Simply visit the JBS homepage and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check made out to Jem, Post Office Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.